Hello everyone, this is Addie on Podfic, back with another podfic. Today I'll be reading The Great Cabin Falling Out by And in This Mist All Adventures Go. This will be chapter 5 and 6. We'll start with chapter 5, The Quiver. If it weren't for the sun streaming through the curtains and directly into his eyes, Will would have slept for longer. Even though it was where he got his powers from, Will really wanted to install blackout curtains for the cabin. Maybe that was something he could implement as head counselor. Will groggily sat up and looked around. Austin was gone. Depending on the time, he was probably at breakfast or their arts and crafts slot that morning. Though he was sure they were already off schedule, Will was either going to be sleeping or in the infirmary watching over Kayla, who was also unable to participate in camp activities for the moment. If it were him, Will wouldn't be making pressing flowers or weaving lanyards his top priority. Begrudgingly, Will got dressed, made his bed. He was about to sprint out of the cabin, the most popular mode of transportation for exiting the building this week, when something made him stop. He turned around, baffled. There was no one here, though he almost swore he saw movement. The only thing that caught his eye was the hyacinth flowers in the box on the windowsill. Sunlight danced on the floor of the cabin, on the petals of the flowers. It occurred to him that this was a rare moment alone at camp. For all anyone knew, he was still asleep. Clarice or one of her siblings were on duty. All of his responsibilities were taken care of for the moment. It was just him and his thoughts. Will didn't like it. His body seemed to float away from him for the moment. Before he knew it, Will made his way over to the window and knelt reverently in front of the flowers. Before he knew it, tears were streaming down his face. In this first moment of peace and solitude since the war, where his thoughts could finally roam, the stress, the worry, all of it seemed to spring from him. "Please," he whispered, "let her be okay." It wasn't a prayer to his father. It was what Will would have said to Lee if he was here. In a way, he never would leave. His quiver was still hung up on one of the hooks in the room. After all, what else were they going to do with it? His family didn't want a reminder of that part of him, the part that doomed him before his life was able to really begin. It seemed wrong to return to the armory for someone else to use it. Will wondered who would wear it next. It would happen one day, surely. Would it be when he was no longer at camp, when no one in the cabin could remember who it belonged to? It would have to wait for someone who was left-handed. Will remembered the way Lee's quiver pointed in the opposite direction than everyone else's. He had never taken Sandeep's eye out once when the two were running during capture the flag. The words would have also been spoken to Michael. Will remembered the way he would coolly lean against the wall before saying exactly the wrong thing. He was better with gestures than words, especially if it involved his arrows. There was the way he would place his hand on top of Will's whenever his hands would start shaking. "Easy, brother," he said once when Will was splinting his first broken bone. "You can do this." Will sobbed, feeling the sun on his face. When all he really felt was darkness, he really hoped Michael was right. Eventually, Will made the walk to the infirmary. He forced himself to take the long way around, so he didn't run. It also was more time for his tears to dry. He ended up regretting this, as Kayla did wake during Clarice's shift, which annoyed Will more than it should have. Chiron had also come by with an antidote during Will's slumber, so Kayla was well on the way to recovery. For all intents and purposes, they had it covered, hadn't needed him after all. At least, that's what he thought until he walked in the room. Kayla was lying back, head against the wall. As soon as she saw him walk in, her eyes lit up. "Will?" "Easy, Kayla." He ran forward and put a hand on her shoulder. "Don't try to sit up yet. You still have a bit of a fever." Stubborn as always, she absolutely tried to sit up, but deflated when Clarice stepped up to stop her. Will did his best to arrange the pillows onto her. "What happened?" She rubbed her head. "Everything's a little fuzzy." Will frowned. "One of the Hecate campers wanted to try out a poisoned blade during sword practice the day before yesterday. I guess you must have gotten hit." Kayla nodded, as if all the details were coming back to her. Will wasn't sure if now was the time, though when would it be? "Next time, please tell me if you don't feel well. We'll handle it." Kayla hung her head. "I'm sorry I scared you. I just didn't think it was that big of a deal. Besides, I knew you had enough on your plate." He squeezed her hand. "It's okay, Kayla." His eyes found Clarice as he said, "I'll always be here for you all." A little while later, Will had insisted on doing the final checkup before Kayla was officially dismissed from the infirmary. Kayla sat on the edge of the cot, humming to herself, fairly clearly eager to leave. Will's mind wandered as he went through the motions of taking her vitals. Clarice stayed the whole time, leaning up against the wall. She insisted it was to make sure Kayla didn't try to immediately run off. Will took Kayla's wrist, trying to focus on taking her pulse. A question nagged at him. "Do either of you know where Austin went?" Kayla immediately shrugged. Clarice thought for a moment. "I think he was walking with the Demeter cabin to go to the canoe lake. To go to canoe on the lake." Will's chest flooded with relief. He was glad to hear that Austin was enjoying himself, that he trusted in the head counselors to have it handled. Clarice joined him at his side. Glad to see you up, Noels. She handed her a glass of water, showing more tenderness than Kayla had ever seen from the daughter of Ares. It was gone immediately when she continued. Your face was green, like a neon green, the older girl teased. You almost had us worried. Kayla grimaced. I'm grateful for you guys taking care of me, but I do have a favor to ask. Name it, Will reflexively answered. She shook her head. Actually, this one's for Clarice. The girl jerked her head up in surprise. It took only a moment for Clarice to cover by coolly crossing her arms. Depends on what it is. There was a beat of silence. Then, would you be able to help me with something? Chapter 6. New Rules. The first order of business was sleep. Not Austin. He was completely fine by comparison to the rest of the cabin. No, it was clear that Will would not be cured with one above average nap from earlier in the Apollo cabin. As for Kayla, despite her protest that she was completely healed, she passed out as soon as she got back into the cabin. They were awoken by the sunset and a knock on the door. Will hurried to open it. He took a step back when he realized it was Austin. Before he could insist that Austin didn't need to knock on his own cabin door, Will saw others behind him. The Ares cabin were lined up just outside, clearly hiding something. What's this about? Will hesitantly asked. Was there already another situation, so soon after this one just barely got resolved? If someone was hurt, there would be more urgency, right? His eyes found Clarice, who just shook her head, refusing to give anything away. She wants everyone to see something, Austin said with a mischievous smile. Will shrugged and disappeared inside the cabin to retrieve Kayla. With everyone from the Apollo cabin assembled in front, Clarice and her siblings nodded. In one swift, seemingly coordinated motion, they parted, and the most beautiful flying chariot Will had ever seen was revealed. It was the only flying chariot he had seen, but still. The whole thing seemed to glitter in the golden hour, painted a bright white with golden trim. Everything was perfect, down to the gleaming buckles on the Pegasi's harness. Flapping their wings and holding their heads high, they knew everything about this visual was to be admired. The cabin had clearly spent some time polishing and cleaning the chariot. Will thought the golden and glittering ribbon tied to the front was over the top, though Kayla disagreed. After a few seconds of taking it all in, Clarice said, We'll get everything ready if you want to take her for a quick spin. No words were necessary. Kayla and Austin ran forward, fighting over who got to drive first. After a nod, Will jogged to catch up with them. The ride was smooth and absolutely breathtaking. They soared over the woods, the strawberry fields. Will vetoed for Kayla to try any loop-de-loops, even over the lake. Eventually, a smile spread across his face, watching the torchlights around the dining pavilion light up one by one. Austin tried to hand Will the reins, but he shook his head. There would be time later. Right now, the sun had completely disappeared over the horizon, enough to see the bright lights and people gathering around one of the cabins. It was time for the festivities to begin. It was the first real celebration since the Battle of Manhattan. There had been a campfire back then, of course, but the fog of grief still hung in the air. The ashes from burning the shrouds still stained the gravel in the fire pit. There didn't seem to be a place for joy right after, but now rebuilding was taking place. Healing was finally returning to the valley, as well as Kayla's bunk. The Stoll brothers were more than happy to smuggle in good snacks, but Kayla's request was a bit extra. Clarice paid the fee happily. For one night only, the barbed wire on the Ares cabin was taken down. Hestia's hearth in the courtyard seemed to glow extra bright that night as campers gathered around. The party was against the rules, sure, but this was the beginning of an era for throwing out old rules, maybe even introducing some new ones. At the very least, Chiron turned a blind eye that night, and an ear, as the music blasted from the speakers. The Festus cabin could be heard all the way down Long Island Sound. Campers danced, chatted, and found comfort enough to let out a breath, to take down their walls and let their guard down for the first time, in some cases for the first time ever. Clarice found Will leaned against the back wall of the cabin, nodding his head along to the beat of the music. You okay? She raised her voice to compete with the unhealthy decibel levels the tunes were set to. Will startled at her approach. Yeah, I'm fine. She shook her head. I thought you didn't get enough sleep. I wasn't kidding about knocking you unconscious, soulless. No, it's not that. He put down his solo cup. That was actually the best sleep I've had in a long time. Thank you again for taking a shift. Will looked around. It's just like how things used to be in a way, but also not. I just can't help but think how much Michael would have liked this. Clarice took a breath, about to launch into a few words. In the end, all she did was nod. Yeah, he would have loved this. Hey, she raised her cup. To Michael. Will smiled, tapping his cup to hers. To Michael. A few campers turned their heads, whispering. Before he knew it, one of the Ares campers cut the music and stood on top of one of the bunk beds. He raised his cup, bellowing, To Michael! His words echoed across the room, the reverent effect rippling and making waves. Slowly, every demigod raised a cup and spoke the name of someone who had been lost. To Beckendorf, chorused 5 people, all standing shoulder to shoulder. To Selina, some camper shouted back. To Lee, hollered Austin. To Castor, Pollux yelled, choking on the words. On, everyone went, until every demigod who had given their life over the past few years was named. Well, almost. In the end, it was Clarice who jutted out her chin and whispered, "To Luke." The hush whispers echoed in the cabin. Not for long, as a child in the meter bumped the speaker and got the music started again. Clarice laughed, draining her cup of its contents. Will took another sip, trying to hide his contemplative face. He was sure that this wasn't happily ever after. It would take him a long time, maybe forever, to truly forgive her. The resentment still clouded his heart, but in the end, she deserved to be happy, to find redemption. They all did, in some way or another. They were all responsible, even if it was a tiny chunk. Luke wasn't alone in his actions, after all. He wasn't the only demigod to defect. There could have been someone in this room that could have stopped Luke, or someone else. The war wouldn't have happened. Michael would still be standing here. The world had to move on, though. Eventually, Clarice and him would find something else to argue about. It was in her nature, after all. As for what was his nature, Will couldn't shake the feeling from when his powers reacted to his anger back in the infirmary. He had pushed it away for now, though he had told Clarice otherwise, that darkness was still here. The worst part was, Will wasn't sure it was a new addition. Had it always been there, just waiting for the right moment to finally be released? He would try to urge to go back to sleep. Their attention was pulled by a cheer near the front of the cabin. Kayla had switched the music to a new track, her public appearance showing that she had a clean bill of health. The camper from Hecate approached. They were apologetic, but refused to stop the production of the poison, now knowing how effective it was. All Kayla requested was a vial to tip her arrows with for battle. A deal was struck, an apology was accepted. A little past midnight, Kayla pulled Clarice aside. She intended to make good on her request. Clarice only raised her eyebrow once. "Are you sure? This color?" Kayla nodded. "Oh, yeah." She'd had to touch it up since then, begrudgingly accepting help from Will and Austin, but she'd kept the highlights in her hair green ever since. And that was the last chapter of the Great Cabin Falling Out. I hope you all enjoyed, and honestly, rereading this last chapter almost brought me to tears. Oh, because, it got me pretty close the first time I read it. It got me just a little bit closer this time. And I'm warning you for the one-shot that I'm going to do 2 weeks from now, as a segue into the next series. Because that one actually brought me to tears several times. Multiple times. Okay. I'm gonna yap a little bit here, because I like to yap. So next week, so school week, so tomorrow I have a field trip, and then the day after that I have IRD testing, because of course, I hate it so much, but we're forced to do it, so, and then Friday I have another field trip, so that's cool. I hate the testing part, but the field trips are cool. Yeah. Yeah, so on Monday, we have an 8th grade trip. Yes, I'm in 8th grade. I've never mentioned that before. I've never told anybody how old I was. I'm 14. So, a little bit of lore drop. I'm not telling anybody my name, but that I kind of have part of it in my username. So that's fine. Anyway, for our 8th grade trip, so we could have gone to the Hands-on Children's Museum, or just some other museum. There were several different options for museum, but as soon as the student council member who keeps track of all this stuff, mentioned that we could go see the Minecraft movie of all things in theaters, literally every single person except me, my friend group, and this one other kid we're friends with, all voted for it. Every single person. So yeah, I'm going to see the Minecraft movie tomorrow. I'm not excited. Yeah, and then Tuesday's already testing, so that kind of sucks. And then Friday, we're going to the beach for a field trip because we live like on a beach. Um, and we're gonna do a beach cleanup thing. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be better than the Minecraft movie, but it's better than school, so I'd rather be there than at school, honestly. Um, oh yeah, me and my girlfriend have now officially been together for a year. Um, our 1 year anniversary was the 16th. So that's cool. I have now officially been dating my girlfriend for 1 year, and that is simply amazing. Let's see. Oh, I've gotten so into Hades. Um, if anybody wants me to read Hades fanfiction, I happily will. I already have several Hades fanfiction saved. I even have a Hades Percy Jackson crossover fic saved. It's still updating. There's still one chapter left that needs to be posted. But as soon as it does, I'm reading it because I want to read it. It's so good. Yeah, I should probably end this. Yeah, I've been yapping for like 4 minutes now. Uh, anyway, I hope you all have a good night or day wherever you are. Um, and bye.